think it was Mike Mignano, a partner at Lightspeed, who was at Spotify before. He spoke about kind of the removal of the power of the social graph and the friendship graph, and moving to kind of a content discovery graph, and content discovery being so key. We've seen that with Reels now, which I love. I see many baby videos on Reels, which clearly shows that I need to get moving.
I feel you use TikTok more. I need to convert you to Instagram and Reels.
There's no charm, my friend. But my point being, is it really still friending? Is it really still following? Given the fact that actually Reels is so dominant, time on side is so dominant, is it not attention?
I think it's all of the above. Where do you get so you look at TikTok and what they're doing right now. They're focusing very heavily on messaging. They're focusing very heavily on friend graph. So clearly it's important. They're bringing it back in. Twitter, Snapchat, these companies focus on following. Like, how often does YouTube prompt you to still follow an account? I mean, I'm sure you want people to press the little notification button. If you haven't, please do. So it's part of the mix. It isn't 100% anymore, and you shouldn't treat it like it's 100% anymore. But it's definitely part of the mix. And where do you get that first bit of data on what to show to people? It's who they follow and who they friend and what they like.
Do you think people are too binary in how they state some of their opinions today? We just had lunch and discussed some, which I won't bring up, but do you think that people are too binary?
Yes. Yeah. In all ways. I say this as a gay man. Everyone's too binary.
Right.
I have a friend who's a VC who would want me to say bi guys exist. It's like...
We're going to get to it. I want to ask about the Facebook Messenger split. We did touch on it. Talk to me about that, because that seemed like a pretty pivotal product moment for the company and for the product. Why did you do it, and how did that go down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story and probably too long for this podcast, but fundamentally in the shift to mobile, we'd actually done very well with messaging on the web. The product that was built there, I think Chris Putnam built the original version of it. I can't remember. I think it was called Chirp. Anyway, we built this chat on the web, integrated, and it did really well. It grew tremendously. And it was growing. And then mobile came along, and we launched Mobile Messenger. We were tracking it, and mobile messages were growing. Great. But we were measuring it the wrong way. We were actually losing market share because the web was declining faster than mobile was growing for us. And then WhatsApp and iMessage and all of these things were coming along. And actually, the shift of platforms meant even though we were growing mobile messaging, we were growing it slower than the industry, and we were losing market share in the shift to mobile. So that was when we sort of went, oh, actually, this strategy isn't working of the hybrid. We looked at what was correlated with people using messaging the most, and it was them using the Messenger app. And we investigated with user research why. And it was because they knew that when people had the Messenger app, they would respond instantly to their messages, whereas when they were messaging inside an app as DMs within an app, they didn't actually expect to get an instant message. And so our messaging product was being used more like DMs than it was being used like a true messaging app. So that showed us that we really needed to have a true messaging app where you knew if someone had a blue dot that they were on Messenger and you knew you could get a response rather than it being DMs chatting inside an app when you had spare time. That pushed us to say, what does it take to do this? We ran experiments. We did it responsibly. We did it by country. So the first countries we did it in were Portugal, I think, and Romania. And we saw a tremendous increase in usage. Initially, there was a dip in usage. And then we saw a rebound and a tremendous increase because people had the expectation they'd get an instant response. We tested it in another set of countries, Hungary, Czech Republic, a set of countries. We selected based on different merits of the country to see what it would happen in different types of country.
Don't you love the way people always think Australia? Everyone's like, oh, we tested Australia. I'm sure there are other parts of the world which are used for testing. I have to ask, you mentioned there about kind of those early signs and that little dip. People hate change, fundamentally. I remember it many times with many different apps I've used. I think it was actually Snap that said a lot about this before. But it's like, if you look at the data, how do you determine between a dip because of expectations changing and a change of core behavior versus actually oh shit, this isn't working?
Well, again, this is why you need to segment and you shouldn't run experiments. I mean, it depends on your scale, right? At that stage, we were a publicly traded company. Like, we had north of 1 billion users. It was a very different scale for us versus a startup. In startup mode, you actually have to take a lot more bets without certain data. As a mature company, there are some massive bets you should make. Reels, virtual reality, where it turns out you're going to take a big risk to do that bet, but it's the right thing to do and you can't do it with numbers.
Are these really risks? if you actually think about it, like Reels, if it didn't work, it's not a sink the boat decision in a Bezos world, is it?
I mean, I think like it is to some extent because of the limited resources. Like you only get to make a few bets, and if you make the wrong bet and you miss the next wave, you're in real trouble as a tech company. Look at how Microsoft languished for a very, very long time. So I do actually, I mean, it's not going to, this is the point of absolutes. Is it going to sink your company? No. But it really matters you don't miss lots of different waves as a company.
Yeah.
But when you're a bigger and more mature company, you can afford to do some longer term experiments. So we did it in these countries and we watched how those countries evolved while we perfected the design and the methodology for the rollout. Personally, I think we took too long. And if I went back and did it again, I would have moved a lot faster, which is weird for a Meta executive to say, but I actually think we moved too slowly. And in many ways, it was my fault because I wanted to measure everything. But the data was completely clear. And then we rolled it out globally. And even though we had that small initial dip, we could argue it to everyone whose metrics got hurt and say the dip is worth it because look at Romania, look at Portugal, look at the Czech Republic, look at Hungary.
Does speed really matter?
Yes.
But if you have the data and you can make decisions with more clarity and more awareness and more precision, is it not better to be second?
It matters. WeChat took markets, Line took markets. I mean, it really, really matters to move fast enough.
I had Kevin Vile on the show, or Wheel on the show.
Yeah, I love him. He's really nice and so smart. His impact on Twitter's ad business is underappreciated.
Also, just don't go for a run with this guy. Like 10 miles in, he's like, "Oh, I'm just starting."
He's
baby.
very fast.
But he spoke about Instagram stories, and he bluntly was very honest about it being a rip of Snap. And
and so were we.
Yeah, absolutely.
But by the way, Kakao Stories launched before Snapchat Stories launched.
This is a joy of being in the West. We have this kind of shielded knowledge base, I find. My point being, though, it didn't matter being second. And
no.
Do you see what I mean? So I'm just trying to understand if actually speed does matter. You learn more from being second. You can perfect more. And actually, is it sometimes best?
I think it's good to get out and iterate. Yeah. Personally, I think generally it's okay to be second, and we're totally fine being second, catching up on the basics, and then trying to out-innovate, like step. Like launch, catch up, overtake with innovation. I think is a very, very good model. You don't want to be third or fourth. And actually, when someone's got to the point of product market fit, you really need to move fast. And the other thing that move fast gives you, and again, the lady from Growth Hackers was awesome. She was saying, like, you get to get more experiments in. I think Brian said it. I think you had multiple people in here say the pace of learning really, really matters. And so no, getting out, shipping and trying. The first version of Reels failed. We tried to put it in the stories spot, like we tried to integrate it that way. It hard failed. Getting a couple of revs on that, we were out before YouTube. We were out before anyone except TikTok with our competitor there, faster than Snap, who also cloned and copied TikTok, despite everything they've said about that. But like we were out faster than everyone else, and we got our first iteration failed. Second and third, we learned a lot. Now we're actually innovating and adding really cool things that people aren't trying other than us. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't iterated 2 or 3 times.
There's so many things for me to unpack here. Fuck the schedule. We said launch, catch up, out innovate. Where would you say you are in Reels' progression?
I think we've got a bunch of stuff now where we're starting to innovate. I can't really talk about it, but I think like we're through the catch up phase, and now we're in the competing on innovation on this particular format.
And you said there about kind of the amount of reps, meaning the increased rate of learning. Yes. But most people actually don't spend the time to learn and to really synthesize the lessons, the takeaways, what needs to change, what needs to be different. How do you actually think about instilling the most effective postmortems, whatever you want to call them, to instill lessons from the prior to impact the next?
I mean, this is where certainly my job at Meta, the most important job I have is data science and data engineering, the analytics role. And I think you need analytics leaders who are patiently right. This is the coaching I try and give people in analytics who are asking about influence, because analytics is mostly an influence role. You need to analyze stuff and people need to believe you and then take action on what you say. So the way that I think about that is you need analytics leaders who can explain what's happened, who take out enough caveats. They are correct in what they say. They are not lying with data. The first question you ask is, what does the other person need to know, even if it's uncomfortable for me to tell them? But sometimes we bury ourselves in caveats and then leaders like lose the message we're saying. So you get the message through very clearly. that you're trying to explain to the leader in question who's running the product. And then they may listen to you and they may not. If they don't, and then what you said would happen based on experimental or correlative data happens, you very politely, and again, this is a technique that's hard to do, basically say, I told you so, and hope they listen to you better the next time. And then over time, you build this learning function in with analytics that actually says, here's the data, here's what's going to happen, you should do this, and you're believed. And that builds in the muscle inside a company to actually learn rather than just do the experiments and not internalize